The glass struck the fireplace before Clara reached the library door, and the sound of it stopped her where she stood. Inside, a man was shouting for about 6 weeks. 6 weeks, he said, and then a house that had stood for 200 years would pass into the hands of a cousin he despised. Clara pressed the tray against her ribs and waited in the dark of the passage, because a servant at Blackthorn Hall learned very quickly that doors were safer than rooms. It was the 19th of November in the year 1867, and the rain had not stopped falling on Derbyshire for 9 days. "You might have married any of them," said Lady Beatrice Ashcombe, and her voice carried through the oak as easily as through paper. "Miss Latimer, Miss Rowe, that perfectly agreeable creature from Nottinghamshire, whose father owns half a county." She spoke for 2 hours about her spaniels. "Then you would have had 2 hours of peace and a spaniel." "I would have had a wife." "That, Edmund, is precisely the object." Clara heard a chair pushed back. She heard the Duke of Ravenshire cross the room in 5 long strides, the way he crossed every room, as though the floor had insulted him. "My father wrote that clause, knowing exactly what it would do to me," he said. "He wrote it in his own hand 11 days before he died, and he had the goodness to leave no explanation whatsoever. Married before the 1st of January, or Ferndale and the whole of the Western farms go to Percival. Percival, who has never in his life risen before noon or paid a debt before a summons. Then marry and be done with it." "To whom?" "To anyone. Society is not short of women. Society is short of one who does not look at me as though I were an entry in a ledger." Lady Beatrice was 74 years old and had buried a husband, 2 brothers, and a great many illusions. "You have 6 weeks," she said. "You will discover that a ledger is a very comfortable thing to be when the alternative is Percival at Ferndale." The door opened. Clara stepped back, but not quickly enough, and the old woman swept past her with a shawl gripped in one fist. Lady Beatrice's eyes went over her once, sharply, the way a person examines a tool she may want later. Then she was gone down the corridor, and her stick struck the boards all the way to the stairs. Clara went in, because the fire wanted mending and the glass wanted lifting, and because 3 years in that house had taught her that the Duke's temper burned itself out faster when somebody simply continued working. He stood at the window with his back to her. Edmund Ashcombe was 32 years of age, tall, dark, and famously disagreeable, and he held his shoulders like a man who expected the world to argue with him and intended to win. "Leave it," he said without turning. "Your Grace will walk on it in the morning. Then I shall bleed in my own library, which is my right." Clara knelt and began gathering the pieces into her apron. "It is also my duty to see that you do not." He turned. She did not look up. She had learned over 3 years the exact degree of attention that was safe. "You heard," he said. "I heard shouting. I could not say what it was about." "You are a poor liar, Miss Whitmore." "I am an excellent liar, Your Grace. I am simply not lying at present." Something in his face altered. He came and stood over her while the rain went on against the window, and neither of them spoke. Clara Whitmore was 24. Her father had been rector of St. Michael at Ashby in Lincolnshire, a mild, scholarly man who taught his daughter Latin because there was no son to teach, and who died leaving debts that swallowed the furniture, the books, and the small annuity intended for her sister. Lucy was 17 now, and lived in Somerset on the charity of a cousin who reminded her of it at every meal. Clara sent money 4 times a year. Clara counted every shilling twice, and then once more, before she slept. "Stand up," Edmund said. She stood, holding the folded apron with the broken glass in it. He looked at her as though seeing her for the first time, which was, in a manner of speaking, exactly what he was doing. He had passed her 1,000 times upon the stairs. He had once heard her correct him quietly upon a point of scripture, and had been too astonished to dismiss her for it. "You are sensible," he said. I am told so. You are unmarried. I am. You have no family of consequence, no fortune, and no expectations. Your Grace is remarkably well informed about my misfortunes. I need a wife now, he said. Come with me. The room went entirely silent. Come with you where? Clara asked. To London. There is a chapel in my mother's old parish, where a license may be had, and no questions asked that money cannot answer. We may be married within the week. You will have 400 a year settled upon you, entirely your own, beyond my reach and beyond any man's. A further sum for your sister, a house in whatever county pleases you. You will be a duchess. I shall keep Ferndale, and Percival may go to the devil in whatever conveyance he prefers. Clara did not move. You are not asking me to be your wife, she said slowly. You are asking me to be a document. I am asking you to be practical. I have never known you to be anything else. And what would your Grace require of this document? Nothing, he said, that you did not wish to give. It was said quickly, and it was said honestly, and it cost him a great deal. She saw that. She saw the whole shape of his life in it, a man so accustomed to purchase that he had reached for the one unpurchasable thing in the room and immediately named a price for it. No, Clara said. He blinked. I beg your pardon. I said no, Your Grace. You cannot possibly understand what you are refusing. I understand it perfectly. 400 a year, a settlement for Lucy, and a name that would open every door in England. Her hands were shaking, and she gripped the apron tighter so that he should not see. And I should spend the whole of my life knowing that I was chosen the way a man chooses a horse at a fair, because the hour was late and the animal stood nearest. That is an unjust comparison. It is an exact one. You would rather scrub grates. I would rather owe my bread to my own 2 hands than owe my happiness to a man who does not know that he ought to ask for it. She lifted her chin. If your Grace requires a wife, you must first learn how to deserve one. Edmund Ashcombe, 9th Duke of Ravenshire, opened his mouth and discovered that there was nothing whatever inside it. Clara curtsied, carried the broken glass out of the room, and did not permit herself to weep until she had climbed all 3 flights to the attic and shut the door. By Friday, it was everywhere. A footman had been in the passage. A kitchen maid had a sister at the inn. By the time the tale reached the village, it had acquired 100 embellishments, and by the time it reached Mr. Percival Ashcombe, who arrived at Blackthorn Hall on the 23rd of November, uninvited and smiling, it had become a weapon. A maid, Percival said at dinner, turning his glass by the stem. Cousin, I confess I admire the economy of the thing. One saves entirely upon the wedding clothes. You will not speak of it again, Edmund said. I shall speak of it in every drawing-room between here and Pall Mall, and so will everybody else. And when you present your bride in January, the whole of society will know precisely what she was carrying the week before. Percival smiled into his wine. Unless, of course, you present no bride at all, in which case I shall be far too occupied at Ferndale to gossip about anybody. Lady Beatrice set down her fork. Your father was a fool, Percival, and he died a fool, and you have inherited the only thing he had left to give. And yet, said Percival pleasantly, I shall have the Western Farms by 12th night. Clara stood behind the sideboard through the whole of it, with her hands folded, and did not move a muscle of her face. She resigned the following morning, properly, in the housekeeper's room, and said nothing about the Duke at all. She said that her sister required her, which was true in the way that useful truths are true. Lady Beatrice sent for her before she left. The old woman sat by the fire with a rug across her knees and a writing-case open beside her, and she looked at Clara for an uncomfortably long while. You refused my nephew. I did, my lady. Why? Because he did not want me. He wanted an end to a difficulty. And you consider yourself too fine for that. I consider myself too poor for it, Clara said. The rich may afford to marry for reasons. The rest of us have only ourselves to bargain with, and I did not wish to spend the whole of it in a single evening. Lady Beatrice laughed, a dry sound like paper tearing. Then she sealed a letter and held it out. Mrs. Eleanor Pembroke of Laura Place in Bath, a widow of 61 with a wicked tongue and no patience for fools. She has been begging me these 2 years to find her a companion who can read Greek and hold her own in an argument. You will suit her. She will pay you £50 a year, which is a good deal more than she pays her cook and a good deal less than she will owe you for the entertainment. Clara took the letter. My lady, why should you trouble yourself? Because I am 74 years old, said Lady Beatrice, and I have watched every clever thing in that boy's life be handed to him without his asking. Go along and do not write to me. I detest correspondence. Clara went out to the carriage in the rain, and Edmund watched her go from the library window and told himself that he was watching the weather. The house was not quieter after she left. That was the strange part of it. It was louder. The clocks were louder, and the footsteps of servants who had never once told him he was behaving foolishly, and his own voice at dinner speaking about nothing to nobody. He rang for tea, and it came without comment. He was disagreeable at breakfast and agreed with. On the 2nd of December, he lost his temper with a groom over a girth strap, and afterwards stood in the stable yard in the cold for a quarter of an hour, ashamed, with no notion of what to do about it. On the 4th, he asked the housekeeper with elaborate carelessness whether Miss Whitmore had left an address. Bath, Your Grace, Laura Place. I have business in Bath, said Edmund, who had none whatsoever. He arranged some before the day was out. Bath in December was pale stone and grey sky and the smell of coal smoke, and the winter season had filled it with everybody in England who could not afford London and everybody in London who was hiding from something. Mrs. Pembroke kept a house in Laura Place, 4 rooms of which were entirely surrendered to books, and she disliked Clara heartily for 3 days, and afterwards could not do without her. You read too well, the old woman complained. It makes me idle. Read the passage again and this time make some mistakes so that I may feel useful. Would you prefer the mistakes in Greek or in English? In Greek. My Greek is worse, and I shall not notice. It was Mrs. Pembroke who carried her to the upper rooms upon the 11th of December, in a gown of grey silk made over from one of the widow's own, and it was in the doorway of the upper rooms that Clara Whitmore saw the Duke of Ravenshire standing beneath the chandeliers with a glass in his hand, and his face arranged in that expression of well-bred boredom which she had spent 3 years observing from behind chairs. He saw her in the same instant. He crossed the room. She had time to notice that he did not walk around the edge of the dancers, but straight through it, and that 2 dowagers turned to watch him do it. Miss Whitmore, Your Grace, you are in Bath. I appear to be, and Your Grace is in Bath, which is far more surprising, since Your Grace once informed me that Bath was a town for invalids and card cheats. I have business with a solicitor in Milsom Street. Upon the 11th of December at 9 in the evening, in the upper assembly rooms. Edmund was silent for a moment. You are enjoying this? I am enjoying it enormously, Clara said. Then the music began, and the whole weight of the change came down upon them both at once. She was carrying nothing. She was not standing behind him. She was simply there, in grey silk with empty hands, and he would be obliged to speak to her as a man speaks to a woman he cannot command. He did not know how. That was the discovery of the fortnight that followed. He called at Laura Place and sat in the crowded drawing-room with his hat upon his knee, making observations about the weather, until Mrs. Pembroke informed him, without looking up from her needlework, that the weather had now been thoroughly settled, and he might say something of interest, or else go home. He sent flowers. Clara sent them to the infirmary. He procured an invitation to a concert of ancient music, and spent the whole of it seated 4 chairs distant from her, and afterwards handed her into the carriage and said, "You look well," in the voice of a man reading a sentence from a book. "Your Grace looks tired." "I am tired. I have not slept properly in 3 weeks." "Then your Grace should go into Derbyshire, where the beds are excellent." "The beds," Edmund said, "are the difficulty." He shut the carriage door before she could ask him what he meant, and Mrs. Pembroke observed all the way up Great Pulteney Street that the young man had the manners of a bear and the courage of a rabbit, and that the combination was uncommonly interesting. Upon the 16th of December he made his worst error. They were walking in the Sydney Gardens at a respectable distance from one another, with the widow's maid behind them, and he had been rehearsing the thing for 2 days together. "I have written to a school at Clifton," he said, "for your sister. It is well spoken of. The fees would be settled quarterly, and she need never learn from where. Miss Whitmore, do not look at me in that manner." Clara had stopped walking. "You would pay for Lucy." "I would, and in return nothing. It is not a bargain." "Everything is a bargain with you," Clara said, and her voice was low and it shook. "It is the only language you possess. You cannot say a thing plainly, so you purchase the nearest object to it and set it down at my feet and stand waiting to be thanked. You did it in the library with 400 a year. You do it now with my sister, who is 17 years old and has nothing in the world, and who would be very glad indeed of Clifton, and that is precisely what makes it cruel. I meant it kindly. I know that you meant it kindly. That is the worst of it entirely." She pressed her glove to her mouth for a moment. "If you wish to give me something, give me the truth. Say why you came to Bath." "You know why I came to Bath." "I do not. In 3 years I never once knew what you thought of me, except that I was useful." "Then you were not attending," Edmund said, and turned and walked away down the gravel path, which was the first occasion in his life that he had ever retreated from anybody. Percival came to Bath before Christmas in pursuit of Miss Georgiana Vane and her £40,000, and he found Clara first. He found her in Milsom Street on a wet afternoon with a parcel of books under her arm, and he lifted his hat and smiled and walked beside her as though they were the oldest friends in England. "Miss Whitmore, what a very great pleasure. I have a proposal for you, and unlike my cousins, it comes with no obligations whatsoever." "I am engaged, sir." £200, said Percival, "to be gone from this town before the new year. To Ireland, if you like. I am not particular." He kept his voice pleasant and his pace easy. "You are the only obstacle. Edmund will marry nobody while you are within 50 miles of him, and if he marries nobody, I am a landed gentleman by 12th night. It is a business matter. You have a sister. £200 would clothe her handsomely." Clara stopped in the middle of the pavement. "Sir," she said, "you have just told me that I am the reason he will not marry. I would have paid you £200 for that information. Good afternoon." She was 3 streets away before her hands ceased to shake, and she did not sleep at all that night, because a thing had been said aloud that she had not permitted herself even to think. Percival, being a man who never accepted a refusal when a humiliation was available, brought the rest of it to Mrs. Fenwick's card party upon the 21st of December. He came across the room with a glass in his hand and stood over Clara's chair. "Miss Whitmore, how very well you look. One would scarcely know you." He turned, smiling, to the whole circle. "Ladies, you must permit me to make a proper introduction. This is Miss Whitmore, who until quite recently had the care of my cousin's linen at Blackthorn Hall. The upper linen, I believe. There is a distinction." The silence that followed had a particular quality to it. Clara had heard it before, in servants' halls, when somebody was about to be destroyed for sport. She rose. Her hands, she noticed with some surprise, were perfectly steady. "That is quite correct," she said clearly. "I was in service 3 years, sir. Before that, my father was rector of St. Michael at Ashby, and he is buried there beneath the east window. I am ashamed of neither circumstance. Are you ashamed of any of yours?" Mrs. Pembroke's laugh cracked across the room like a whip. "Percival Ashcombe, your father owed my husband £800 and died without paying a farthing of it, and I have the paper in my desk still. Do sit down. You are standing in front of the fire, and I am old." And then the door, and Edmund in it, having heard the last of it from the hall. He did not shout. That was what Clara remembered afterwards, and remembered for years. He crossed to Miss Vane, bowed, and said in a voice pitched deliberately for the entire room, "Madam, I am obliged to tell you that my cousin's expectations are not what he has represented them to be, and that if he has spoken to you of Ferndale, he has spoken of property that is not his, and may never become his. I should be a poor sort of gentleman to let you learn it after the settlements were drawn." Percival went white to the lips. "You will answer for that." "Gladly," said Edmund. "Name your hour." "Nobody," said Mrs. Pembroke, "is naming any hours in my friend's drawing-room 3 days before Christmas. Go home, the whole pack of you. Miss Whitmore, my shawl." In the carriage, the old woman looked at her for a long time by the light of the passing lamps. "He is in love with you," she said. "The poor creature has no notion how the thing is done. He has spent 32 years being obeyed." "He does not need to be in love with me," Clara said, watching the wet street. "He needs a wife by the 1st of January. In 11 days it will not signify in the least what he feels. It will only signify what he must do." "And that troubles you?" "It ruins everything," Clara said. "Whatever he offers me now, I shall never know whether he offered it to me or to the calendar, and I should have to live inside that question for 40 years. The road out of Bath toward Chippenham was blocked with snow upon the 23rd, and it was in a stopped carriage upon that road, with the lamps lit at 4 in the afternoon, and the horses being led back through the drifts toward an inn, that Edmund finally said it. They had travelled separately and arrived at the same impassable place, which he swore afterwards was an accident. Mrs. Pembroke, who possessed a genius for such moments, had gone inside to demand a fire and had taken the maid with her. "I dislike you extremely," Edmund said. "That is an excellent beginning. You have made my house unbearable. I go into the library and it is full of you not being in it. I have 140 people in my employ, and not one of them has ever once told me that I was wrong, and I did not know until you were gone how badly I had wanted somebody to." He was gripping the edge of the carriage door hard enough to whiten his knuckles. "You told me I must learn to deserve a wife. I have thought of nothing else for 5 weeks together. I do not know how it is done. I have no example before me. My father married my mother for 11,000 acres, and never afterwards addressed her by her Christian name in company, not once, in 22 years. Clara's breath came out white in the cold. "And what have you concluded?" "That I would rather lose Ferndale than have you at the price of your pity," he said, "and that I am going to lose it because I have 8 days remaining, and I will not ask you again while that clock is running." "Why not?" "Because you would not believe me," Edmund said, "and because you would be entirely right not to." The snow came down between them, and neither of them moved. "That," Clara said at last unsteadily, "was very nearly the truth. It was the whole of the truth." "Then you are learning," she said, and went into the fire, because if she had stayed 1 moment longer, she would have done something that neither of them could have undone. The papers came to light upon the 27th, and they came to light by accident, which is the way such things generally happen. Mrs. Pembroke had been the dearest friend of the late Duchess of Ravensshire. When the Duchess died in 1859, she left 3 trunks of correspondence in the widow's keeping, with instructions that nobody of the family was to have them without asking, and nobody of the family had ever thought to ask. They stood in a box room in Laura Place beneath a great quantity of dust. "You may as well sort them," Mrs. Pembroke said. "I shall die soon enough, and my nephew will burn the lot for the pleasure of watching them go up." Clara worked through the second trunk on a grey afternoon, with her sleeves pinned back. Letters concerning a child's fever, letters concerning a garden, a pressed violet from 1841, gone the colour of weak tea, and beneath all of it, wrapped in oiled paper and tied with tape browned at the folds, a document engrossed upon parchment, signed and sealed and witnessed by 2 attorneys of Derby. It was dated the 9th of June, 1849. In it, Mr. Gerald Ashcombe, in consideration of the sum of £6,000 paid to him by his brother Henry, Duke of Ravenshire, released and renounced for himself and for his heirs forever, all claim, interest and expectation whatsoever in the lands of Ferndale and the western farms of the Ravenshire estate. Gerald Ashcombe was Percival's father. Clara sat down upon the floor of the box room with the parchment across her lap and understood 3 things in quick succession. The first was that Percival had no claim at all and never had possessed one, and that the western farms could not pass to him whether Edmund married or not. The second was that the late Duke's clause had therefore never been a threat in the world. It had been a piece of theatre arranged by a dying man who wished his son married and who knew exactly which fear would move him. The third was that if she carried this parchment into Derbyshire, the Duke of Ravenshire would be free. Free of the calendar, free of the ultimatum, free of every practical reason on earth for taking a wife, and that whatever he did afterwards, he would do because he wished to do it. She sat there a long while as the light went out of the window. She was perfectly aware that she might wait 5 days, and the clock would run down, and he would come to her with the whole weight of ruin at his back, and she would have him. Clara took the 11 o'clock train from Bath upon the 29th of December, changed at Birmingham, and reached Derby by the last of the light. Blackthorn Hall was lit from end to end when the fly brought her up the drive, because Lady Beatrice had assembled 7 guests and 3 eligible young women in a final campaign, and the great hall was full of wet cloaks and card tables and the sound of an instrument being played badly by somebody's niece. Edmund came out of the drawing-room and stopped where he stood. "You are in my house," he said. "I am in your hall. There is a distinction." Clara drew the packet from inside her cloak, and her hands shook so violently that she was obliged to use both of them. "Your Grace, carry this to your solicitor tomorrow. It is a deed of release, executed by your Uncle Gerald in the year 1849 for £6,000. Percival's claim is nothing. It has been nothing these 18 years. Your father's clause has no power over you whatsoever. Edmund did not take it. You brought me this," he said, "upon the 29th. "Yes." "You might have brought it upon the 2nd of January. "Yes." "Why did you not?" "Because I want you to be free," Clara said, "and because if you come to me afterwards, then I shall know." The candles burned in the hall. Somewhere behind them, Lady Beatrice was informing a bishop's wife that the instrument was out of tune, and so was the niece. Edmund took the packet from her hands, set it down upon the table without opening it, and said, "Marry me." "No," said Clara. "I have not read a word of it. I do not care what is inside it. Ferndale may fall into the sea and take the farms with it." "You have 3 days remaining, Your Grace, and in 3 days I should have nothing whatever to hold against the whole of England when they say what they will certainly say." She looked up at him steadily. "Ask me on the 2nd of January, if you still want it. You are the most infuriating woman in this county." "I am the most infuriating woman in 4 counties, Clara said, "and you will find that I am worth the wait." He asked her upon the 2nd of January, 1868, in the frost of the West Garden, without a settlement, without a figure, and without any mention of her sister, she said yes before he had properly finished the sentence. Percival left England in February for Boulogne, where creditors travel more slowly. Miss Vane married a ship owner and was extremely happy. And upon a morning in early spring, while the wedding clothes were being argued over in the small parlour, Lady Beatrice observed to nobody in particular that Eleanor Pembroke had been her closest friend these 51 years, and that it was remarkable how a letter of introduction, written in a temper, could go so very neatly to the one house in England where the late Duchess's papers had lain untouched since '59. Clara turned round slowly, with a length of ribbon still in her hand. "My lady, did you know what was in those trunks?" "I knew Eleanor had them," said Lady Beatrice, examining her needlework. "I knew Henry Ashcombe paid his brother off in '49, for I was in the room when he counted it out. And I knew my nephew had never in his life opened a family paper because he considered them dull." She snipped a thread. "I did not know that you would sort them. I did not know that you would carry them north upon the 29th instead of the 2nd, which was the only part I could not have arranged, and which was the only part that signified." "You might simply have told him." "Child," said Lady Beatrice, "I have told that boy the truth for 32 years, and he has never once listened to a syllable of it. You told him no. It took you a single evening. They were married upon the 9th of April, 1868, in the small church at Ashby, where her father lay beneath the east window, with Lucy in a blue bonnet, and Mrs. Pembroke weeping loudly and insisting that it was the draught. 7 summers later, upon a warm afternoon in June of 1875, the long window of the Blackthorn Library stood open upon the lawn. Clara Ashcombe, Duchess of Ravenshire, 32 years of age, sat upon the step with her shoes off, which was a thing no duchess in Derbyshire had ever been known to do, and which the household had long since given up remarking upon. On the grass before her, Marianne, who was 6, was conducting a funeral for a beetle with tremendous solemnity, and Henry, who was 3, was undoing the funeral as fast as it could be arranged. A letter had come from Somerset. Lucy was 25 now, married 2 years to a physician at Taunton, and she wrote every month and wrote a great deal too much. Clara read it aloud in the sunshine, because Marianne could manage her letters only slowly and had no patience for anybody's handwriting but her own. "Mamma, what does she say?" "That your cousin has a tooth, and that the roses have blight, and that we are all to go there in September." "Is a tooth important?" "It is, if you happen to be the tooth." Edmund came along the terrace with his coat over his arm, having ridden out at 7 to argue with a tenant about a drain, and having, as usual, lost. He was 40. He had gone grey at the temples, and no gentler in his opinions, and there were 4 men upon the estate who now told him regularly that he was wrong, every one of them appointed by his wife. He sat down upon the step beside her and said nothing for a while, which was the thing she had taught him and the thing he had learned best. "Beatrice's stone is finished," he said at last. "They set it up on 5 Tuesday. I did not care for the lettering." She would not have cared for it either. She would have said so at length, and then left it exactly as it was. He watched his son fall over and get up again. "Clara, do you ever consider what would have become of us if you had said yes that night in the library?" Clara folded the letter into her lap. From the lawn came a shriek of outrage concerning the beetle. "We should have been married by the 28th of November, she said. "I should have had 400 a year. You would have kept Ferndale, and we should have been perfectly civil to one another for the whole of our lives." "Yes," Edmund said. "And I should never have known what your face looks like," she said, "when you are asking for something you cannot take." He did not answer that. He took her hand instead, there upon the step, in full view of 2 gardeners and a boy with a barrow, and held it while the children shouted on the grass, and the light moved slowly across the old grey stone of Blackthorn Hall. If this story stayed with you, Share it with someone who believes love should be chosen and never commanded.